from the News Channel 5 Network. This is OpenLine.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to OpenLine. Glad you are with us tonight. Tonight, we are talking about Washington. What is going on in Washington? And certainly there is a lot that is going on. It's a little hard to follow, but we can kind of unpack things tonight. You can ask questions. Certainly, you can have comments. But we're talking, and think about what's going on up there right now. They're going to vote on potentially an infrastructure bill. They're going to vote on raising the debt ceiling. They're going to vote on a huge spending bill that Democrats say is needed. Republicans say is just way too much. You know, they totally opposed. And then General Milley is testifying about Afghanistan and other things. And this is all in advance of the midterm elections that will be coming up not too far away. So plenty to discuss. Happy to have with us Dr. Thomas Schwartz, political science professor at Vanderbilt University, joining us via Zoom. Dr. Schwartz, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you very much, Ben, for having me on the program.
Well, all right. So as you go through everything I just kind of went over, what stands out? I guess let's start with the debt ceiling. How big a deal is that? Is there going to be a government shutdown? What are your thoughts on that whole fight?
I don't think there'll be a government shutdown. It does seem that they're pretty close to an agreement. That would happen tomorrow if there would be a government shutdown. But a lot of what I'm reading out of Washington, particularly the attitude of Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, who's often been a person who's been willing to shut down the government, he doesn't seem to want to do it. And I think both parties think a government shutdown in the middle of a pandemic still and everything else going on would be a bad idea. So I don't think that will happen. They'll probably pass a spending bill to get us through to December. The debt ceiling is a different issue. We're talking about something where I think both parties are kind of playing chicken with. It doesn't happen until mid-October, where there would actually be a situation where the United States could default. But essentially, the Republicans are blocking the attempt of the Democrats to insist on a bipartisan passage of a lifting of the debt ceiling. And they're doing that because they oppose these massive spending bills that the Democrats are coming up with. And they are unwilling then to countenance going ahead with the debt ceiling, even though a lot of that debt was incurred during President Trump's administration. And so there is an argument that they share some responsibility for it. But they are, in a sense, being difficult about it now. They want the Democrats to pass the debt ceiling solely by themselves without any Republican support. And Senator Schumer wants some sort of a buy-in from the Republicans on it. So that could be a interesting, like I say, a game of chicken up until October 18th, when the United States could possibly default.
All right, now that's interesting. And see, I've already learned something right there. I was even thinking that the government shutdown was tied to the debt ceiling. You're saying they're two separate issues.
They're separate issues.
One could happen tomorrow if the votes don't go right. We could shut down the government tomorrow. The other debt ceiling, there's until October 18th.
Yes.
And so what's at stake with the debt ceiling? Let's say we don't have a government shutdown tomorrow, as you are saying. What if we can't come to an agreement on the debt ceiling? What happens?
Well, it would be unprecedented. The Fed chairwoman Janet Yellen said that this could lead to a recession. It could lead to all sorts of economic effects around the world for the United States not to honor its financial commitments. So it is considered a very, very serious matter for the United States not to meet its fiscal responsibilities, its financial responsibilities. And there are all sorts of possible horror stories coming out of it. In fact, in terms of what would collapse or what it might do to markets around the world, all of that, what it could do to the United States' debts in general, its credit rating. These are things that it would be unprecedented for the United States to do something like this.
So this would be unprecedented, because shutting down the government is not unprecedented. I mean,
no, not at all.
We've had that. We've had this debate forever, and it seems like it's shut down. I read it's been shut down like 14 times since 1980. So we go through this a lot, you know. And here we are the day before and you're saying it's probably going to get worked out. So should I get worried? Should I get my blood pressure up about this debt ceiling thing? If it's not until October 18th, it seems like I should really begin to worry maybe October 17th. Or is this something different?
Well, I think what is different is that this is connected. You might say both parties see big stakes in this. Both parties see this is connected to the Biden agenda. So it is possible they could miscalculate and get into a situation where they don't do this, don't do the debt ceiling, don't lift it, and we have a terrible economic effects from it. I mean, one danger is that the parties miscalculate their relative support and stick to their positions and don't compromise, and that could be a disaster for the American financial system. So I think it's worth worrying about. I kind of hope reason will infect our policymakers and politicians, that they won't get that far. But this is a somewhat dangerous game.
And you're saying, just to clarify and put a bow on this and then move on, this hasn't really happened before, the debt ceiling thing? Again, we've shut down the government, but the debt ceiling, this is a different, is it really unprecedented?
Yes. This would be unprecedented for the United States to default, to in effect not honor its financial obligations, its treasury bills, its financial responsibilities. That would be unprecedented and could have a very disastrous effect on markets around the world.
All right, so we'll keep an eye on that. All right, that's of interest. Then what about these other things? So we have infrastructure, and we have and this spending bill. There's an attempt to tie those together. Is that right? Or I guess kind of walk us through what's going on with those two things that are very big.
Well, the simplest way to look at it is that this is the two bills together are the Biden agenda in its most expansive forms. It is, in effect, really expanding the welfare state on a scale not seen since Lyndon Johnson's Great Society. It would provide free college, free pre-K, pre-K education, an expansion of Medicaid. It would do an awful lot of things in the area of social welfare besides infrastructure. And it is separate from there was an infrastructure bill passed by the Senate, which actually had Republican support because it was more traditionally infrastructure. That bill is smaller. That's about 1.8 billion, I think, or a trillion or something along those lines. It's a smaller bill that Republicans went along with because they thought it was traditional infrastructure. At least some did. The Democrats in the House, particularly the progressive wing, want to tie the two together because they feel like if they're not tied together, the party will only get the traditional infrastructure and will not get the more expansive social welfare agenda that President Biden has promised, and that is key to the progressive vision. So, in effect, they want to keep those two together because they think that's the only way to get them both passed. Moderate Democrats and the Republicans want to separate them. Some Republicans don't want any infrastructure, but there probably is enough support for a bipartisan infrastructure in the House to get it through. And but the progressives worry that if it goes through, separate from the more expansive one, the more expansive one will be rejected.
So it's likely, it sounds to me like it's likely they'll pass infrastructure. I think it's 1.5 trillion or something like that.
Right.
But then there's this 3.5 trillion that I like the way you described it because I understood it. It's just this expansive, it expands a lot of stuff. It's a major thing, the biggest expansion of many things since Lyndon Johnson. So that, even there's some Democrats that think that's too much. Is that right? Joe Manchin and right. the woman out of Arizona?
Kristen Sinema.
Yes.
Arizona. Yes.
So they are not even on board with this. Is that an accurate statement?
Right. It is. They are the two that have taken the most heat in the sense of being the two senators that could actually prevent it from being passed. They seem to be willing, though, to accept something smaller, that they might accept instead of 3.5, perhaps 1.5 or 2 trillion in that bill, in that separate bill. The only problem is that if you start cutting trillions from it, you have to choose which programs you're going to cut. And that divides a lot of the progressives. It divides a lot of Congress figures, people. And that opens up a whole can of worms when you start dividing it that might lead to it not being passed. So it's one of these things where the opposition of these two senators, or their desire for a smaller bill, creates all sorts of problems for those who have drafted the bill in the first place, who want the whole thing, because it's involving lots of compromises and lots of programs that satisfy a great number of constituencies.
So if you were to guess right now, if you were to predict, what do you think will happen with those things, those two things?
It's very hard to say, and this is one of those times where I like to say I'm more of a historian. I'll be glad to comment on it after it's passed and what its meaning in history, rather than someone predicting as a pundit. It seems to me that the Democrats really need this. They need something. And so that if it gets to the wire, I think people will compromise and they will pass something that meets the Manchin and Sinema qualifications. So I think something will get passed. I don't think that the progressives are going to get their full $3.5 trillion, but I think they'll get something and be able to say to the voters, we've done this. We've adopted several popular programs. For example, reducing student debt, providing free pre-K education, many things that are family care, providing for people to have the right to take time off to take care of their relatives and that sort of thing. So that there are a lot of popular things in that bill, and they'll be able to say that, and they'll want to bring that to the public when the midterm elections come around. So I kind of think that they will, if push comes to shove, they will compromise and try to push through at least something of that social welfare $3.5 trillion bill.
Interesting. Okay. All right. We have a couple of calls. I'm going to go to those. I'm going to ask one other thing about General Milley. So that's the other big thing. And there are probably some others, but those are the ones we're going to hit on right off the top. General Milley testifying about Afghanistan. He was asked some other things, too, about China. He's testifying about several things. What stands out to you as far as his testimony and what he's doing right now?
Well, what stood out to me most directly was his being able to say very clearly that he had advised the president that he needed to keep troops in Afghanistan to maintain the stability of the Afghan government, that if he were to pull them out, the 2,500 who were there, that was going to be a very dangerous move. And basically, President Biden claimed that he had not really advised him in that way. So there was a direct contradiction. And Milley was very direct, and other military figures in the testimony also said that they also thought that there should be a continual military presence in Afghanistan, and that the president overruled them effectively. And I think that was the most dramatic point that I heard.
I understood that so let's say we keep 2,500 soldiers in Afghanistan. It's my understanding he was also saying if we did that, they would almost certainly come under attack, and as a result, we'd have to put more in. So sure, we take everybody out, we leave 2,500 there, and then they come under attack, and then we put another 50,000 in. We've got to protect the 25 that are there, and it's this endless cycle. Is that kind of what he was saying also, or what about that issue? If you leave 2,500 there, does it really stay at 2,500, or is there this concern that it balloons back up?
Yeah, I think that is the defense of the president's decision, in the idea that, of course, it would have escalated. But no one could say for sure that we would have needed that. I mean, the idea that the Taliban would have attacked, yes, but the military was thinking more in terms of 5,000, not 50,000. And I think the idea was that they could maintain a fairly low level of troops and keep that government in operation. Now, one thing else that General Milley said that I think is important is that he thinks that in Afghanistan, al-Qaeda could reconstitute itself. So in that sense, he thought it was still a threat. And so that the idea of getting out and allowing the Taliban to come in and take power opened up the possibility of Afghanistan once again threatening the United States by becoming a haven for terrorists. So in that sense, I think the idea that we could have kept a minimal military presence there and prevented that takes on stronger meaning.
And I love that you're also a historian. So if you were to put our time, and I asked you this question several times, if you were to put our time in some sort of historical context, what might it be? Is there, because there's a lot going on. I mean, all this stuff we just went over. And then we have the pandemic, and we have this hyper-partisanship, and we have all the things we have. Donald Trump may come back, you know, may run again. We can talk about that. All this stuff. Is there a time in our history that you could point to as a historian, political science historian, and say, well, this kind of reminds me of this or that?
Not as precisely as that. I do think what we are seeing is a retreat of the United States from the position of power which it occupied since World War II, and that the United States, basically its public and its leaders, no longer want many of the responsibilities that once were a part of American leadership in the world, and consequently are terminating a lot of that in terms of looking more at the domestic and other issues that plague our society, that in effect, the divisions in the society, the sense of unmet needs is trumping the idea of being an active power in the world. And in that sense, the United States pulling back is letting other countries either step in or not step in, or allowing a great deal of disorder in the world because it no longer believes it is responsible for these issues.
And that's the idea of America first, essentially, right? The idea that we need to take care of ourselves.
America first and America first and America, you might say, no longer America isolation or simply not playing the role that it played after World War II as a sort of guarantor. And we hated the term, but we were a type of world policeman. We were the figure, we were the power that was called on if there were an emergency. And it seems that Americans now have really rejected that and moved away from it and want other countries to step into that vacuum. And whether they do or not, and whether Americans are happy about what that looks like, is still to be seen.
Very interesting. Okay, I'm being told now I have to take a break. So I'm very sorry. There are 5 people on the line. All of you hold on. And when we come back, we'll just start going through, take all your calls. So if you want to call in, there's still several lines open. 615-737+, 615-737-7587. We will take a break. Be back right after this.